Hey everyone, welcome to the Living Coast at the Brookfield Zoo. My name is Mike and I'm one of the animal care specialists here in the building. And today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite animals, the seahorses. And we are fortunate to have two species here. So come on in and let's look at seahorses and talk about them. There are 47 species of seahorses and we have two species here. The one you're looking at right now is Pot-Bellied Seahorse. And I think the first thing that you should know about seahorses is that they are fishes, even though they're kind of weirdly oriented. But if you look closely, you'll see all their kind of fish characteristics. So right behind their eyes, they have gills, and you can watch the operculum open and close. That's the seahorse breathing, taking in fresh water through its snout, and then expelling it after it pulls the oxygen out of it. And then you'll also look at, they have fins like any other fish. So if we can get a good look at one of their heads, you could see kind of right behind their eyes, they have two fins. Those are their pectoral fins, basically like arms sort of. And they use those mostly for choosing direction and turning their direction, but they could do a little bit of locomotion with those as well. And then if you look along their back, they have a dorsal fin. Everyone knows the shark's dorsal fin, right? Kind of famous for being above the water sometimes in certain movies. But they use the seahorses use their dorsal fins for locomotion, so you can see them kind of undulating it as it moves along in the water. And then probably the most interesting characteristic of a seahorse is that instead of a tail, like a normal fish would have, they have a prehensile tail. And you'll see those if you're going to watch with us on Friday. They'll be looking at pangolins, and they live in trees, so they also have a prehensile tail. That's a tail that will curl around objects. Well, seahorses also live in forests of a sort. They live in underwater forests. So the pot-bellied seahorses that we're looking at here live in kelp forests near Australia and New Zealand. But seahorses are found in a lot of different coastal habitats that are forest-like underwater. So seagrass meadows, coral reefs, and like these guys, the kelp beds. The other interesting thing about seahorses is that the male gets pregnant. So the female will transfer her eggs to a pouch, and then the male will brood them for about a month or so before expelling them into the sea, where they kind of go about their life and no longer receive any parental care. So, but this is unusual. There are no other known vertebrates where the male becomes pregnant, and it's pregnant in a lot of ways. Within the pouch, the male can transfer some nutrients to its developing embryos. So a very interesting life history for this animal as well. And feeding, they eat mostly small crustaceans. So let's see, we can show you. So here's some of the food items that we give them. So they'll get a couple different species of mysid shrimp. So these are a small shrimp that school in the different habitats that they live in. A couple different species of frozen mysid shrimp that we offer them. And then my teammate will be dropping in some live brine shrimp that we enrich for them. And then we'll hopefully get to see the seahorses eat. Seahorses don't have teeth. So a lot of their digestion happens as they suck up the food. So here you can see all the mysid shrimp or the brine shrimp coming in. And then if you watch along here, you'll see the seahorses, predators that they are, sit and wait predators that they are. They'll attach to the bed, but attach to the grasses and things, and then wait for their food to come by. But they have to kind of wait for just the right one that they like. And then you'll see them slurp it up. And then that snick that they do when they grab a piece of food kind of partially digests the food that they're eating. Seahorses also don't have a stomach, so they have to eat a lot and eat regularly. So here at the zoo, we feed them 3 to 4 times a day, that variety of food that I showed you guys. So if you listen carefully, you can actually hear the snick as they grab their food. Maybe, sometimes.
How many seahorses are here at Brookfield Zoo?
So here at the zoo we have two species. We have these pot-bellies, and then we also have some dwarf seahorses, which we have here. We can take a peek. So these are dwarf seahorses. We have a penny there for size scale. These are among the smaller species of seahorses in the world. Of the 47 different species of seahorses, this is definitely the smallest one in the United States, and you can find this species in mostly in the Gulf of Mexico and up the Atlantic coast a little bit of a ways. But
and they're full size?
And these are full-grown adult seahorses. But you can see they have the same anatomy as the other seahorses. They're kind of oriented vertically, just like all the others. So really amazing animals and fully grown at about an inch in length. So
they're really cute. How do you distinguish males from females?
Sure. So we have a male in here. He's in the back. So they have a pouch. Let's see if we can. It's a little hard to tell. This one here is a male, but you can sort of tell their pouch, their outline of their body is sort of flush, whereas the female sort of has an indent or an incurved belly. Let's see if we can see that. And that one that's hanging there is fine. It's just crabby because we're doing a water change and we have her out here. But you can see that her belly, even though she's hanging upside down, kind of curves in where it meets the tail. So that's sort of where she can position herself to give the eggs to the male seahorse. So yeah.
How many offspring do they usually have at once?
So it really depends on the species. So larger species like these pot-bellied seahorses that are here can have 200 to 300 babies at a time. Really small species like the dwarf seahorses or the pygmy seahorses of Southeast Asia, they may have 1 or 2 babies at a time, up to kind of a small handful. So it really depends on the species. Larger ones tend to have more at one time. There's a couple different sized babies. Some seahorse species, like the pot-bellies, actually have pretty small babies that will float around in ocean currents for a few weeks before they settle back down and find a new place to live. Other species, interestingly, like the dwarf seahorse, have larger babies that are a little more fully formed, and they'll settle right away into the seagrass beds that their parents are in. So the size is, even though bigger seahorses tend to have more babies, they usually have better developed babies.
So do they give birth to like live babies, or do they lay eggs?
Yeah, so the female will lay the eggs, I guess, into the pouch of the male, and then the male will care for the embryos for about a month until they're fully formed tiny seahorses, and then he'll release those to go on their way.
What types of other animals are they related to?
So there's a lot of really interesting animals in the Sygnathiformes family. So maybe people are familiar with sea dragons. They're very kind of frilly and have a lot of cool appendages. They're also found in a similar habitat as the pot-bellied seahorses. There are some interesting animals called sea moths that hop along on the bottom. Also, pipefish are a close relative of the seahorse, and they look like a seahorse if you sort of straightened out the kink in their neck and made them just like a straight pencil. But yeah, so they have some really cool relatives. They have a lot of kind of threats as well. Traditional medicines are one of their biggest threats. They're collected and dried for traditional medicines. And they are now CITES protected, which helps prevent transport of seahorses across country borders. So that's helped a little bit, but sometimes, enforcement of these laws is only as good, or the effectiveness of these laws is only as good as enforcement. Most seahorses are coastal, so any coastal development and habitat loss is going to be a problem for seahorse species. And also bycatch is going to be a big one. So especially with like shrimp trawling and things like that, if they're catching shrimp, they may also be catching unintentional animals like seahorses. So it's important to make sure if you're going to eat seafood that you're eating sustainable seafood. So checking with something like the Seafood Watch app and making sure you're making kind of sustainable seafood choices will help seahorses and many, many other species of ocean life.
How many like total species of seahorses are there?
There are about 47 species, and I say about because it seems like every couple of years they find a new species, especially among the pygmy seahorses, which are eensy-weensy, even a little bit smaller than the dwarf seahorses that we have here. So if you're interested in discovering a new seahorse or a new animal, the seahorses might be a good place for you to research and get your dive certification and go out to Southeast Asia, because it seems like they find a new one out there every couple of years recently.
What's the technical name for the babies?
I would say fry, probably.
They're not like sea fillies or sea goats?
I guess you could call them colts. you call them whatever you. They don't care what you call them. So I'd say probably fry. They're pretty well formed, so they're not like larval. Like a lot of marine fish have very tiny babies. Seahorse fry are pretty well formed and ready to start eating. Obviously, smaller food than the adults, but they're hunters straight away.
What's the biggest seahorse? Or I don't necessarily need their name.
Sure.
How big can they get?
About a foot in total length are some of the biggest. These are probably the second largest seahorses, and like in profile, they're called pot-bellies because they have a pretty big belly. All of the animals that you're seeing here are females, so they're not pregnant males in this exhibit. But these are probably the second largest species of seahorse. And the animals that you're seeing here are subadults, and they were aquarium raised in Denver for us. So thanks to our colleagues out there that did that. So these are second largest species. There's a tropical species that gets a little bit longer, but not as chubby, I guess you could say. So.
And are they all different colors?
Absolutely, and they can change color as a little bit. These guys don't change much, but usually they can get lighter and darker depending on their habitat. They can also grow cirri sometimes, which are like kind of little projections off the top of their head to help them camouflage with various algae and seaweeds and things that they live amongst.
Are any of them endangered?
There's a few endangered species, and most of them are vulnerable for some of the conservation reasons I had mentioned earlier. And they are, like I said, CITES listed, which makes it hard for people to transport them across country lines, but that also can create a black market for seahorses. So make sure you don't try to keep them in a home aquarium unless you have a ton of experience. They're not the easiest animals to take care of. So that's one way that locally that you can help kind of conserve seahorses, and don't buy them as curios. If you're ever going on a beach vacation and you see dried seahorses, definitely try to avoid those.
Aww. What does their tail do besides grab onto things?
I mean, that is what their tail does. That's the prehensile tail. They'll grab things. They also do mating dances with their partners, usually in the morning, but some species in the evening. And they can kind of entwine tails as they kind of swim through the water and do their little dances to reinforce their pair bonds. So,
That's sweet.
So grabbing things, usually coral, sponges, algae, but occasionally, I guess, their partner's tail.
Do they know why the male seahorses kind of, not raise the babies, but grow them?
I mean, it worked for them, so they kept doing it. Probably over evolutionary terms. There were probably some pipefish or things before seahorses evolved where the male would take care of the babies. It's a lot of investment for a female to create eggs. So maybe it was a way of splitting the task, where the female would produce the eggs and give them some yolk and the starts of their life, and the male would fertilize and care for them. So the division of labor, I guess, to ensure that they could have larger and healthier babies is probably how that sort of evolved over time.
Do they mate for life?
Some species do. They're pretty. They bond pretty well. This species is not necessarily one of those, but many species of seahorses will bond pretty firmly with their partner and within their habitat, their territory.
Can you remind us what they eat?
Sure. So they'll eat whatever fits in their mouth. Primarily, they like to eat crustaceans. So here they're eating live brine shrimp that we put in there, but in the wild, mysis shrimp, small fishes, anything that they can grab, they'll eat. But they like to sit still and wait for their food to come to them. Although here at the zoo, they will sometimes chase after some food, but they don't chase very hard. They prefer to wait for their food to come to them.
How old are these?
These are a year and a half, 2 years old. And these are one of the longer-lived species of seahorses. They can live about 5, maybe 7 years. Something like the dwarf seahorse that we looked at, those are full-grown, and their full lifespan is about a year and a half. So, yeah. These also live in cooler water, so cooler water things can tend to live a little bit longer. So the temperature in here is 62. They're comfortable in temperatures in the 50s up to the 70s or so, kind of like the waters that they would be native to in southern Australia and New Zealand.
Does Brookfield Zoo work with Project Seahorse?
Project Seahorse is a great organization. It's a great website to check on for more information about seahorses. They do a lot of great conservation work. Dr. Amanda Vincent is, it's a project that she works on, and she's been a great asset to seahorse conservation.
What's your favorite type of seahorse?
I would say Hippocampus hystrix. It's a really spiky seahorse. It's really cool. I've never actually seen one other than in photos, so I'll have to go diving to actually see one. But I think they're all pretty interesting. The dwarfs are maybe my favorite of the ones we have here, just because they're so adorable.
It's a 50-50.
Yeah, they're pretty cute. I mean, then I see these guys, and I'm like, oh no, you guys are my favorite. So it's hard to have a favorite. They're interesting animals for sure.
Let's see. So are they good swimmers? Can they escape predators? What kind of predators do they have?
Yeah, I mean, any fish that can fit them in their mouth is a potential predator for a seahorse. So they're not the most speedy swimmers, but they're pretty maneuverable, so they can turn on a dime. But they don't really try to outrun a predator. Their main plan is going to be to look sort of seaweedish and to stay still. They sometimes sway in the current, so their main way of avoiding predation is camouflage and avoiding being seen in the first place.
So you showed us the difference between a male and a female with the dwarf seahorses. What about these guys?
Unfortunately, these are all females, so we can't show you the difference. But a lot of guests will see these and assume that they're all pregnant males because their bellies are so big. But if you look at like this animal here, like the way her belly comes under and kind of comes at that angle, whereas a male will be a more smooth line all the way through the tail, and that's kind of the pouch where the babies will develop.
Okay. Do we have any males here?
Well, we have just this one dwarf seahorse male that was not cooperating a minute ago. Yeah. So you can sort of see the way that, so the male is kind of the yellowish one in the middle of the grouping there. So you can see how his pouch sort of...
more of an S.
Yeah, it's a smoother transition versus the females where it kind of juts in a little bit.
Uh-huh. Do they curl up to go to sleep?
No, they'll sort of hang out, find their place that they want to hang out for the night, and then they'll sort of stay calm and quiet. So they don't curl up per se, but they'll definitely want to be anchored onto something.
How big are the babies when they go off on their own?
So as soon as they hatch from their eggs within the pouch, I suppose, they sort of, when they're released from the pouch, they are on their own right away. So some species will, like I said, will be pelagic. They'll float around in ocean currents for a while. And other species will settle straight down into the habitat that they were born in. But
okay, so they don't like hang out in the pouch like a baby kangaroo?
No, they won't go back in the pouch. It's a one direction. Once they hatch, they are at the mercy of the ocean.
Okay. That'd be kind of funny. And let's do one more question.
Sure.
What's your favorite fact about a seahorse?
Sure.
Like, what's the coolest thing?
I mean, I think the coolest thing and the thing that makes them so captivating for so many people is that the male carries the baby. It's something that separates seahorses from any other vertebrate animal. So it's a fascinating life history. So, but I don't know. I like that their eyes sort of move independently. They're kind of chameleons of the sea, I guess. They sit quietly, wait for their food to come to them, but they're always paying attention to you, even if it doesn't seem like they are, maybe. But so yeah. So anyway. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us here at the Living Coast. We hope to see you guys soon. Check our website because we'll be opening to the public on March 1st, so we'd love to see you back. But yeah, so thank you for joining me.